Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got a very, very special guest, somebody that I was looking forward to getting on. One, they're into Solomonic magic and they're also into science. So I'm very excited for this. But before we introduce our guest, let me introduce the other reject joining us. We got my man, Headless Giant. What's going on, sir?
How you doing? You can find me on YouTube, on X, and on Instagram, all Headless Giant. And I've got shows that I do with Nick on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I've got a show on Monday called Alchemy Mondays, where we do a bunch of experiments that I think Astra might appreciate and enjoy. So we've got Alchemy as well. And tomorrow I've got the Trialogues with Ethan Indigo and Ricardo Calvario. We're going to be talking about interesting topics as well. Just a couple of weeks, and now I'm back.
Yes, yes. And the 777 we also will be doing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and if you guys have any stories or anything, please send them into Headless and I'll send you out some stickers.
So headlessgiantpodcast at gmail.com. Send me your stories and we will send you stickers.
Hell yeah. Awesome. And now the guest, since we only got one reject with us today, we got Astra, and she was suggested to me from Serena Sinclair. She thought that she'd be a perfect guest, and when I checked out her profile, I was like, damn, sure sounds like it. So I'm very excited to have you on. Astra, please, from Test Tubes and Cauldrons, please let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find your amazing work and your podcast.
Yeah, hey everybody, and thanks Nick for inviting me on. I was super surprised to get the invitation, but thrilled all the same. Yeah, so my name is Astra. I am a Solomonic ceremonial magician, and I focus specifically in the grimoire tradition. But in my everyday life, I'm also a scientist. I got my degree in biochemistry alongside a minor in molecular biology and microbiology. But then I went to graduate school for biochemistry. And now I work in a laboratory where I do science of all kinds, not just biochemistry. So that's a bit about me. You can find me on Instagram at astrological. It's technically astrological with CIAL because the name was taken. And a lot of my magical work and my magical independent scholarship can be found on Substack under the title Celestial Crucible. And that's it.
Nice, nice. Yeah, if you don't mind, after the show, give me the link for that one thing, and I'll add that to the show notes.
For sure, yeah.
Nice, nice. Well, obviously, there's a bunch of questions I have for you, but I mean, I guess we'll start off with like what got you into the occult, and to start with, I guess Solomonic magic.
I know. Yeah, so I was raised in a fundamental, Christian home, as were a number of people, and I sort of became discontent with Christianity as a whole. I didn't see the tenets of the faith being held up with the way people were acting, and I just kind of really didn't like any of that. So when I went to college, just when you're like free from your parents' influence, I decided to explore. And I took a lot of philosophy classes, took a lot of religion classes, amidst all the science work, and was just trying to get sort of a lay of the land. And in doing so, I came across paganism and Buddhism and Eastern traditions. My grandfather's from India, so I've already been exposed to like the Hindu faith. Yeah. So it was just a good time for exploration. And around that time, I became agnostic, but I thought, maybe there's something there. So I started as an eclectic witch, actually. And I was doing all the stereotypical witchy shit that you see on Instagram.
Oh, I was
And
there once. I was there once.
yeah. Yep, I think we all start there, maybe. But it was super shallow. And I really didn't feel like it was working.
Yeah.
And like there was no substance behind it. It's one of those things where you do it because you see it, you do it because people tell you to. But that's never really been how I've lived my life. It's never been enough for me. I want to know the why behind things, which is partially why I'm a scientist. And that applies to the occult as well. And so I really began like trying to figure out what the reasons were behind why we did all these things. And I sort of quickly found out that a lot of it is due to Agrippa and the influence, right, that he had on the occult. And I was like, damn, all right. So I read the 3 books alone for the first time, got very confused.
Oh,
But
yeah.
then I had a friend who pulled me aside and they said, hey, I really think that you would vibe with ceremonial magic. And at first I was sort of hesitant because when you're in the witchcraft community, a lot of people say, the ceremonial magicians are crappy people. It's a bunch of just like trad bros and all this kind of crap. It gives so much shit. So I was really hesitant, but I began looking into it. My friend introduced me to Rufus Opus's Seven Spheres.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the very first thing that I actually worked. And it was really like that sort of planetary initiation that he leads you through was really impactful. And I think it opened up the starting point for my exploration with other spirits. So I worked that. I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to do this. I went online, was looking at ceremonial magic and grimoires and stuff like that. And of course, the first thing that you see is the Key of Solomon. That's like the number one grimoire that everybody knows that pops up when you search. And I pulled it aside and I was like, okay, working with demons, that's a new thing, but sure, we'll go for it, I guess. But I wanted to do it right. And this is also something that I think comes from my science background. But when you have a protocol in the laboratory, you don't just like change it
Yeah.
without good reason because some shit's going to happen. And you remove some critical step that is actually really important for sample preparation, and now your whole experiment is fucked and you can't use your data, right?
Yeah, real quick,
So,
that was one of the main reasons why I mentioned that I ended up joining the OTO is because of just noticing that even with some of Crowley's work, people were kind of like, that's not how it is in his own stuff. So
yeah,
I was like, I guess I just got to go to a place to where they have a set regimen and that's not being played with. This is
yep.
what works and that's what we'd use. I know it almost can sound very, whatever, controlling, but it's just, I wanted something that it was just, this is what I'm doing. So,
Well, I think there's something to be said for having a distinguished cosmology and sort of dogma that you operate from. I know, like, not operating from a place of dogma is a really popular thing right now with chaos magic, but truthfully, if you don't have dogma, you should, at the very least, in my opinion, have like a cosmology, a way in which you see and explain the world, because it helps you determine a framework from which you operate. And if you don't have that, you're just sort of like throwing shit at the wall and hoping that it works, which frankly is a reasonable thing to do. We do in science all the time, but like it should be somewhat educational in how you decide what to do and where. So I totally understand that, like trying to join a lodge to get a lot of that stuff. And I did the same actually. When I decided to work the Goetia, I wanted to do it the way it was written in the grimoire as much as I could.
nice.
Um, but there was a lot of sort of piecing together what that actually meant.
Yeah.
And if you actually read it, there's a lot of preparatory stuff that has to happen. You got to make tools and you have to get all this material, and it takes a while. So it took me about a year and a half to sort of supply everything and make everything for the operation. And during that time, I said, well, I don't want to just like do nothing
Mhm.
while I'm doing all of this as
Makes sense.
well.
Yeah.
So I got a hold of the Cicero's self-initiated initiation to the Golden Dawn and the Big Black Book
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
by Israel Regardie, and I was like, this is something that looks reasonable to like
Yeah,
do
it can keep you busy for a
while
year and a half while you
yeah,
make
to
these
keep me
tools.
busy. So I began working my way through that and doing some of the exercises. How I got familiar with like the LBRP and all the rituals, the pentagrams, the hexagrams, and all that stuff.
Nice, nice.
Went through like Donald Tyson's scrying book. I sort of treated it like a little, I don't know, sort of like a college course at the time through scrying, doing the experiments, writing down my results, and keeping track of everything. And so I really grew actually. Like I look back at that year and a half, 2 years, and it was really foundational for a lot of what I do now. And so I'm really grateful for that time. But yeah, that was sort of the structure that I stole, I guess you could say, from the Golden Dawn a little bit while I was starting the Grimoire Magician experience as well.
Nice. So you used to actually you do the LBRP and the hexagram and all that?
I did all that.
Oh, nice. That's
I did it
nice.
as instructed. I was that person who was like, did it twice a day for a
Oh
year.
yeah, I
I
did.
mean,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
did the whole thing. So
That is awesome. Nice, nice. I used to love when I had to keep it real. Sometimes in the OTO, the women would actually end up doing them way better than the dudes did.
yeah.
There's our lodge, a lodge master. Her name was Connie at the time. She did the regular. I mean,
Hmm.
that is fucking detailed. And I was
Yep.
like, and I mean, that she had that shit memorized. I was like, wow. Yeah, yeah.
I Memorization is something that I think people like really sleep on. I actually it's a rule for myself personally. When I do ritual, I try and memorize all of it, if possible, just
Oh,
because it really allows you to be in the moment. If the words come naturally to you, you can actually really engage with the magic. And like from a grimoire perspective, generally speaking, it's better if you work with more than one person because that way you don't have to play all the roles. But like for me, if I'm doing it alone, then I have to be the conjurer and the scryer and the scribe. Like I have to do all the things. And so if I have everything memorized ahead of time, it sort of takes the conjure like mindset, lets that become second nature and lets me step more into like the scrying mindset. And so it just allows me to interact with the magic a little bit more tangibly instead of being so focused on actually doing the ritual and doing the movements and doing all the other shit that you have to do in the middle of it.
Yeah, no, I felt like once it just like flowed out of my mouth, I was able to, I've mentioned this before. Sometimes for me, those things were just almost like a moving meditation.
Yeah.
And yeah, once I had it memorized, it was just like, I was just going. It's hard to explain, but
Yep. Totally
definitely,
get it.
definitely different than when I'm not trying to worry about what I'm saying.
Yep.
It's like a Western Tai Chi or Qigong, where you're
Yeah.
doing the motion of the energy throughout the body. And I think that's
Mhm.
important for people to realize is that visualization creates something. And if you're not exactly sure what that thing is, keep engaging with it and you'll understand what that energy is moving through your body. But your body is like the antenna that you're picking up and feeling these different currents. And so having that daily practice is, it's attuning yourself to those energies and understanding how they work within your own body.
Yeah, because it can be really subtle. I think that's like when people do ritual and they say, oh, nothing happened. Well, I think a lot of time it's just really settled. If you aren't paying attention to it or you aren't sort of looking for it, you'll miss it. And that was something that I really struggled with early on in my magical career was I was so concerned with doing everything correctly as the conjurer that I didn't pay attention to those like subtle inputs that occur in ritual itself. And for the longest time I was like, damn, I'm a shitty magician. Like this isn't working. But I did some like additional training and I began to notice them more and I was like, oh, I just think I was not paying attention to this. So
Nice. So, more back, if you don't mind, or maybe asking a little bit more about the Goetia. What was your experience with working with that? I mean, if you don't,
um
and that, and like maybe give a little bit more of like, it can be very detailed, like what you were saying, all these things you have to make and wear. Maybe if you could go over that, just to give people more of an idea about.
yeah, sure. So if you read the Greater Key and the Lesser Keys of Solomon, there's a lot of tools you need for this. And some of them I think you actually need, some of them I think you don't need having done this. But like, so for example, you need the robe that has the embroidered certain symbols. You need the shoes that has like symbols on it. You've got to have the headband or the crown. You need the lion skin belt, right? And of course, there are people who talk about how you can use like a stag's pelt for that instead of the lion skin. There are other people who say you can use like a harlot's clothing, right? That was like JSK's big thing, I think. Um, but you had to get that. I had stag pelt because like lion skin is very difficult to get. Although I will be getting some soon. I'm very excited about that.
Ooh.
I know. It's great. And then you have like the white handled and the black handled knives, right? And those have to be made at specific hours with certain symbols on them. And then they have to be like dunked into specific herbal tincture. So I actually worked with a blacksmith at that time, and I actually was able to get like the blood of a black cat. I got it legally. There was nothing illegal going on. I had a veterinarian friend at the time. And I was like, hey, even if it's just dried blood, like that works too. And they were able to get me some, which was great. Made the concoction with like the blood and all the poisonous herbs that everybody tells you to substitute. And then I took it to this blacksmith shop and I was like, okay, at this day and this time, like this is when we're dunking the knife into this like concoction. And so we did it. And so the knives are made according to the full specifications, astrological timing and everything.
Oh shit!
Um, and there was like a whole bunch of other stuff, right? You got to make the circle, and that is like its whole own process with psalms being said over it. The paint all had to be consecrated beforehand. The brushes were consecrated beforehand. It was a lot to do. Like, so that's why it took so long, right?
Yeah.
Because also, if you read the grimoire, they say that you should be making the majority of the instruments during the day and hour of Mercury, so Wednesdays during the hours when the moon is waxing. So if you sort of break that down within a year, that means that within a month, usually about 2 weeks are waxing, and there's 2 Wednesdays during that. So about 2 days per month that you can like actually make substantial progress towards whatever you're doing. And so it was something where it was like a lot of flurry of preparation beforehand, and then those Wednesdays. I was in college and going into graduate school at the time, so like I had the time. It wasn't like I couldn't take a Wednesday off to make all these things. And so that's why it took so long, is because I didn't have every day in a year and a half. I had like 2 days a month, right? Um, and then once I had everything, I went ahead and set up. I actually rented out a like storage place because I wanted a bigger room to do it,
Uh,
and I didn't want to necessarily do it in my own house.
oh, I've known people to do that. Actually, rent out
Yeah,
like
like storage
spots.
facilities.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because it's silly, I think, to do in your own house. But and of course you hear all the horror stories and everything, and I was like, we're just
Hey,
gonna
we'll
rent
let
out
somebody else
storage.
deal with that.
Yeah, exactly. So it could be a haunted story for somebody else in the future.
Yeah. Give Zach Baggins
Um,
something to talk about 10 years from now.
exactly.
Yes.
So
The
I went
haunted
ahead and rented
storage
out the storage
facility.
facility and then did the ritual. I won't necessarily specify exactly who I called up, but
Oh, that's fine.
it was interesting. I'll put it that way. The first time, like, it worked. I did get. I wouldn't. I At the time I wasn't necessarily like primed enough to be able to communicate with the spirit very well, but I definitely saw things on the outside of the circles. Like shit was happening. I heard banging on the walls of the storage facility. And I was doing one there. I felt like super fucking late at night. Like I had to get special permission from the facility manager to be there so late. Um, and what I asked for came to fruition about 3.5 weeks afterwards. So by the end of the time that I did it that month. And I only did it once since then. So I've only done two goetic operations in my whole magical career, because I later went back and I sort of reread the Lemegaton, and I was like, I there was someone I talked to someone at this early point in my career, and they said, "Hey, you should consider working it backwards." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they pointed me to John R. King. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote Techniques of, is it High Magic or Solomonic Magic with Stephen Skinner? I don't recall the exact title. And so they pointed me to him, and he recommends doing it backwards. So you work from the Ars Nova, or what people think is the Ars Notoria, and you
Okay.
work then towards the Goetia. And the reason why is because if I'm gonna okay, technically speaking, the Ars Nova is not the Notoria, but we do think that some parts of it came from the Notoria. So there are people who say, oh, we'll just work the Ars Notoria first then, instead of doing the Ars Nova. So just a bit of background on that. So I was like, okay, fine. The reason you do that is because the Ars Notoria gives you all the skills you need as a magician, right? It's there to help you learn the liberal arts. That's the whole point of it. And so you're teaching you like it's teaching you mathematics, it's teaching you natural philosophy, it's teaching you all kinds of shit that like the Renaissance magician would know. And so that gives you all the skills. And it also sort of serves like a, should you pursue this, should you not pursue this? Because you have to get approval, essentially in a dream from the angels to pursue the Ars Notoria. And then once you do that, you move to the Ars Paulina, which is looking at mostly zodiacal angels, right? And then you go to the Ars Almodel, and you get the angels of the four um, altitudes, which, like, technically speaking, historically are also zodiacal in nature, but I won't get into that. And then you move to the Theurgia Goetia, and you have this correspondence of angels and demons, or these sort of these aerial spirits, which are like above the Goetia, but they're technically sublunar. And then you get to the Goetia. So the whole idea is that if you work it backwards, you sort of build your use spirit team in a sense, right? To like have your back as you go into working with these spirits who within the system are considered dangerous and malevolent. And I thought that was a really good idea. So I put all my Goetia stuff sort of away. And I said, okay, let's back up a little bit and let's actually do this. Let's work the Notoria, then let's kind of move our way through. So I did that essentially for the next like five, six, five, five-ish, 5 to 6 years of my life. I worked the whole system of Solomonic magic from back to front. And I sort of found throughout that process that I actually don't need to work the Ars Goetia. really ever at all. And I work mostly the Almadel, the Paulina, and then I do a lot with the Angels of the Pentacles. Of the Greater Key as well. So I sort of like have moved away from the Ars Goetia. I just think it's overrated. Like, I just don't think it's necessary. I think it's ultimately where I fall. And there are frankly, there are like other terrestrial spirits I would go to before I'd go to them anyway. And so that has sort of left my practice over time, but it's certainly where I started. So we'll leave it at that.
So on the idea of hierarchies within the spirit world. Now, hierarchy itself means a divine order. And so when you're dealing with either demons or angels or anything in between, it's sort of like they're connected to an element, and that element is kind of the precursing factor for what these spirits sort of do within that associated sphere. Now, when you're dealing with goetic elements, is there this idea of fear associated with sort of the underworld sort of hierarchy?
I don't know that there's a fear associated with them necessarily. I think that they've come to be feared, and like the modern occult community, people don't work with them because they're scared and they're like, oh my gosh, demons, whatever. Like, truthfully, they have their place in the hierarchy. I don't think it's something to be fearful of. If you want to work with these more chthonic aspects, or you want to get really nitty for like treasure hunting and shit, the Goetia are great. Like, they literally are spirits inside, like underneath the earth. If you want that stuff, like those are the people, those are the ones to go to. Um, or things that are like hidden that you need to be brought to light. The spirits of the Goetia can also be really helpful with that. That's why some of them are connected with diseases, right? Because diseases are often hidden within the body. So I think that like they have their place sort of within the hierarchy. I don't necessarily think they're to be feared, but I also would say like do your due diligence and don't like treat them like a friend, if that makes sense. Like they're still spirits, they're still powerful, they can still do a bunch of shit that you may not want in your life. So that's why when like I work Solomonic magic specifically, I try to do it as closely to the book as I can because I just think that when you start removing safety protocols, like all of the shit, the circle, the knife, the sword, the names of God around you and on your person, they're all there to protect you, the magician. And when you start removing that, you're essentially like stripping away protections bit by bit until there's nothing left between
Right.
you and the spirit. And so, do you need to fear them? No, I'd say if you're working the system as you need to, or like the way that it's written, I don't think you have anything to worry about. It's when you start sort of stripping that stuff away that I think there's more to be concerned about. It's why I'm not a huge fan of demonology. Can't really say anything positive about that necessarily from my own perspective. But yeah, so I don't necessarily think that you need to fear anything. They're spirits just like everything else.
So would you say that high magic consists of a contractual sort of space or liminal space between the physical world and the spirit realm?
Mm, I think high magic is, so let me back up a little bit. Within ceremonial magic, you sort of have two separate parts of high magic. One is theurgic, right, which is much more devotional in nature. And the other is more thaumaturgic, which is this like practical application of magic. It's where you get things like pacts and stuff like that. Um, I actually think in order to be a good magician, you need to have both. You need to have a theurgic practice and you need to have these like pacts. So specifically when we get into the grimoire tradition, with the spirits of the Goetia, there is this level of like sort of coercive pacting with them, although it doesn't need to be coercive. I think this is the misunderstanding people have is that because you call them into a triangle and you call them into the circle and you're, essentially saying you will do this, that you like are abusing the spirits, but the pact still has to be made. You still have to come to an agreement. Like it's not the spirit still has to say, yes, I will do this thing. And you say, then I will do this other thing for you. And you come to an agreement within it. It doesn't have to be disrespectful. There are magicians who are part of the higher ceremonial magic and more tradition who don't like the coercive nature of that. And like, I'm one of them. But you still need to operate sort of within the realms of that pact aspect of it. All of this to say that that's an important aspect of it. But there's also an aspect of this theurgic devotion where the practical shit is done because like we live on earth and we have needs, right? And even the grimoires tell you you got to get your shit together as a person living a life before you start doing some of this stuff. And in order to do that, you work with these spirits because they can give that to you. Like some of the goetic spirits can give you a job, can give you money, can give you health, like help you with health issues. Like they can help you with those things. And so can the angels. I mean, don't get me wrong. But like once you have your life together and you're set up, essentially your financial problems are good, like health is good, personal problems are good, that gives you more opportunity to do what I think the real purpose of high magic is, which is this sort of chasing after apotheosis or unification with the divine, right? You can't do that if you're like about to be homeless. So a lot of the grimoires, you have both of these aspects. You have the practical nature of help yourself live a better life, and you have the theurgic side of ceremonial magic where it's like, okay, now that you've done that, like let's sort of shift our focus towards being unified with the one creator, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Well, what role do you think distractions play in sort of hijacking people's, natural progression? Because it sounds like this would be the progression that a lot of ancient mankind would be going through, coming into a more, stable kind of a civilizational setting. Like now you've got everything working for you. How are you getting close to the divine? How are you elevating your own consciousness? And in a lot of ways, I see, distractions as being the tool by which people get off of the path towards divinity and more stuck in this realm of materiality.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you there. I think there's a lot of, in a modern day, there's a lot of distractions. And truthfully, if I didn't have to survive by having a job, I would be that person who like goes and becomes a nun just so I can engage in magic full time. Like I freaking wish that was in sort of, I wish that was my will. It's not, unfortunately. Um, I think social media is perhaps the biggest. Like to be so for real with you, there is so much shit peddled on social media that gets people like all caught up into petty arguments with people that could be misunderstandings or conspiracy theories that send you down, rabbit holes of, hours of research. And it's just like how much of that impacts you on a daily basis and like your actual life. And if it doesn't impact you, then like it doesn't really matter, I think, that much. I think so many people get distracted by things that are really superficial and really don't matter. And like personally, one of the things I do every single year during Lent, because I'm also Catholic, is I remove social media from all of my devices.
Oh,
I
very
like
good.
I close on the apps, I delete everything from my phone. And I do it because it's a really important sort of spiritual reset for me during that time to like remember what the focus should be. And for me, like that focus is this sort of unification with God. Like ultimately that is my desired goal. And what do I need to get there? And what is holding me back? And I find that just a lot of online stuff in general, I think holds me back. It is so much, I feel better
Mm.
and closer to God when I engage with other people, when I engage in my practice. And I can't do that if I'm wasting hours scrolling on TikTok.
I have realized how much more work I can get done on this show if I really don't engage too much on social media, and how much more
It's
happier I am.
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. It's yeah, that's really, I think, kind of like the biggest mind fuck on humanity is really these apps. I hate to say it.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
just
because our attention spans are worse, and that's
it's
been
yeah,
scientifically studied. Our capacity for deep thought is worse. There was a recent MIT study that came out looking at the impacts of AI on people's ability to think critically when they were writing an essay. Crazy how much just using AI for research alone prevented the growth of gray matter, which is really what you actually want in your brain. Um, and just is making people incapable of forming coherent arguments and really putting together like good solid information. Why has information declined over the years? Because people aren't reading books and we aren't talking to each other and having these like deeper philosophical conversations, asking the questions of why. Like it's really sad to see, and I see it in myself. Like my capacity 10 years ago to do like really difficult research, it's harder now than it was. Like I see that in myself. So I'm not over here shitting on everybody because I'm shitting on myself as well here. But it is sad that it's gone down so much, and we're only at the beginning of it.
yeah. All right. Oh, Hellas, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. We like to talk about the art of memory too, as sort of like this
Oh
sort of
yeah.
introductory kind of way of understanding how these different angels work within the conscious mind, as well as, how ancient people saw polytheism. Like it was this massive mnemonic device that sort of branched out and associated with everything just on the surface level. And having the memory to sort of put everything that you see into this photographic framework and having mnemonic devices was seen as a superpower. In fact, they accused, what was his name? I keep blanking on it.
Bruno?
Bruno. They accused Bruno of having these strange magical powers when he was using these mnemonic tools and devices that he had learned from the ancients in his own practice. And I think that art of memory plays a massive role.
Yeah, I love Giordano Bruno. So glad you brought up the art of
Yeah.
memory. Great, like concept and topic. You guys covered it on your show, I think, a while ago. Um,
Mhm.
there's such an interesting like misrepresentation of ancient culture, I think, among magicians. Sometimes we treat it like it's like, oh, it's a separate pantheon of gods. But truthfully, in a lot of ancient civilizations, like it was a permeation into culture. Like it was so interwoven that there wasn't a separation between religion and magic and everyday life. Like it wasn't separated like it is in sort of the like in the Western world nowadays.
Yep.
And so, like you said, a lot of this sort of art of memory stuff, it's one of the reasons why myths were so important to the civilizations, because they taught moral and social codes, right? Like everything was so interwoven and woven into these like associations within the memory with these symbols and certain names and everything like that. Um, that there wasn't separation that we see today. And so it did have a bigger impact on the individual because they were the current that we talk about in sort of societies nowadays that you have to like get plugged into in order to do effective magic. That current was just their life. And so there was no plugging into it. It was literally just their life.
Yeah.
Right.
That is true.
I got to bring this up. So a good example is the golden ass. We were just going through it on Great Pills podcast. We were talking about all of these sort of strings of epithets that they had for the gods and goddesses that they would invoke upon, certain activities or when, they're cursing somebody. And so the whole chain of, epithets would be sort of representative of their connection to these gods and goddesses. And it wasn't seen as sort of obscure or difficult to understand. People sort of had that in their minds already at the time. And it was like this combination of both nature, psychology, and physical matter that I think a lot of people just lose perspective on when they're looking at their own societies, because we're sort of disconnected from those different layers of society that exist all around us at all times. And not having that awareness really makes it hard to have a decent conversation half the time.
100%. This is why the cosmological, like, there's such an importance on having a cosmology, because, like, that's what that is to these people, right? That is their cosmology. It's the way in which they view the world and they live their life. And when you have that, the way that you work magic and engage with the world totally changes. And so, kind of returning that to our practice nowadays, where we have been so separated, like everything is categorized now, right? You have science, you have magic, you have religion, you have like psychology, you have all these things, and sure, we say they're interconnected and we give examples of that, but like people don't live that connection. And I
Right.
think that's like that's really the problem. But when you have a cosmology, it gives you sort of a worldview by which to allow all of them to sort of marry in a way that is fluid and you can't necessarily define. And it's funny because like as somebody who's a scientist, people will ask me, how can you have faith and be Catholic and how can you also do magic? And the answer is because I don't see, it's all interwoven to me. Like God's creation and the spirits that we engage with are interwoven into the things that I study scientifically and the magic that I do and the way I interact with the world. Like it's not they aren't categories in my life. It's just the way in which I live and interact with the world. So I think like the capitalistic and like consumeristic categorization of everything and like scientific materialism that came about in sort of the late Renaissance period, like in the Enlightenment period, just really fucked a lot of shit up in terms of people being able to live within these cosmologies in a very real and intimate way.
Right. And if you look at the tiny little tools that single cellular organisms use, you find a lot of coordination with what these gods used as their implements, right? So you've got this bow and arrow, you've got these spears, you've got shields, you've got all the rest of the stuff that single cellular organisms are using in a very utilitarian way that actually reflects a lot of these ancient pantheons.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is what the ancients were talking about. They're making a system of infinite associations because they understand that these are the base level interactions that people can sort of have. Even, everything is love and war in their concept, right? These are the fundamental primaries. And so they're seeing all of these things, have that same attribute. And since we don't have a cosmology, it's easy to take advantage of people because they don't even see the weapons on a psychological level. Like they're getting hooked by people who are using these psychological weapons, and they're not actually seeing them for what they are because they don't really have the experience to know that these, things that people have done ripple out to infinity, right? All of those associations are rippling out to infinity. So you could start to see it, or you could stay blind to it at your own detriment. And I think that's where we've kind of gotten stuck the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said there. 100%.
Well, talking about microscopy, are you actively working on any scientific projects that can change the world, or what are you working on?
Well, I will say, so one of the things that I'm doing, so one of my specialties is 3D cell culture. And I'm going to explain this in sort of terms of like why it's important. But when we have a drug, for example, that we're trying to develop for whatever the disease condition is, the way it moves through the pipeline is you start with the drug that the chemists make, and then we characterize it. And first, we characterize it in cells. So, like if I swabbed my own cheek, I could take the cells there and then plate them and have them grow external to myself continuously. And so, oftentimes, what we'll do is we'll take diseased cells and we will plate them external from the source. And then we essentially treat them with these drugs to see what the outcome is. And then we say, okay, great, we saw an effect. And so now we move into animals, and then they do the testing in animals, and then we go from animals into humans. Now, the problem with each of those steps is that the way cells act in like a petri dish versus the way mammalian cells act in the body, or even in an animal, it's different. Because, like, and this is something that happens commonly, you have a drug that, say, works really well in mice, and you see a great effect. Like we can talk about cancer drugs, everybody knows what those are. And the tumor size like decreases, and the animal is regaining weight. It's eating more. It's more active. We say, okay, great, it worked in this animals. Now let's move it to human studies. So you do that, and you see no effect. Well, even though the drug is sort of targeting the same kind of protein, for example, there are differences between like a mouse protein and a human protein. And so one of the big areas that we're focusing on in research now are these developments of what we call 3D cell culture models. And the whole point is to sort of simulate the human organ essentially as a whole, as a way to sort of bypass the animal step. And the reason why it's important is we can actually take these human cells that the drug will be working on in like the body, we can put them into this external 3D system. And one of the things that we did was create what's called a lung on a chip system. So we essentially have a membrane that we put cells from the lungs onto, and there's hundreds of different cells, right? So we're talking a whole mixture of things. And then we put this chip into a machine and we force it to breathe. So the membrane moves up and down like the organ your lungs would in your body. And there is a difference between how essentially viral infection, for example, we were doing some stuff with SARS-CoV-2, and the infection is more intense when we incorporate this sort of breathing mechanic in this 3D model than if you were to just do it on like cells that are sitting on a dish. And so it shows the importance of really mimicking what's happening in the human body to get a good understanding of how a drug will treat something. And so we're trying to develop a lot of these sort of 3D cell culture systems. We've got lung on a chip, we've got brain on a chip, we've got like nerves on a chip. We've got livers on a chip. Like we have all these sort of different 3D models that we're trying to make as precursors for drug testing before we actually get into human models. That can sort of skip the animal part of this, because animals aren't necessarily analogous to the human condition. If we can actually say, hey, in this 3D model, we see really effective results from an upregulation of a particular pathway, for example, with this specific drug that is actually more comparable to a particular protein in an actual human, then there's a higher chance of probability that it'll be successful in human trials. And so
Right.
it essentially quickens the line from drug development to actual treatment, which is huge. So that's like a big thing that I work on at my job, which is super cool. And I'll stop there to start.
Well, you've got a lot of occult principles that now you can incorporate into the laboratory process that were missing before, because you've got the principle of rhythm, right? You've got the principle of all of these other factors that play into the human laboratory, which would be, you know, our bodies that we're trying to influence, that aren't necessarily present in those laboratory conditions, that, you know, are missing a lot of the pieces that would make up a full, you know, human system. And so by introducing those other principles, you're simulating what the whole human system would be doing in these specific conditions. So yeah, I think that's really a positive step, you know.
It's cool too, because it's a good, I actually think that the interaction and the interplay of things in this like 3D culture system that we're creating is a good sort of representation of like how the I don't know, the heavens or the whole spiritual ecosystem kind of works, right? We say that there's tons of interplay of everything. I mean, even within these 3D subculture systems, like the interplay is crazy. There's so much shit going on, it's even impossible to measure most of the time. And I think like people, especially in the Grimoire tradition, sometimes it's really easy to get bottled into this idea that everything is in a strict hierarchy. And truthfully, and like we know that's not the case, because there's plenty of systems and grimoires that say like moved, Michael is actually representative of Mercury and Raphael is actually representative of the sun, right? Or there's actually three governors over a particular time period. It's not just one particular archangel. But I think there needs to be a little bit more fluidity. Like the structure of the grimoires are for us as the magicians, people doing the work. But truthfully, I think sort of the cosmos and the grander scheme of things is so much more fucking like it's so complicated. There's so many spirits that we don't know who are serving under various spirits that we do know. And
Right.
so I think like there's so much in this like really integral network of interactions that's happening on like a spiritual level, and I think we see that mimicked within nature. And humans are only one example of that. I mean, like ecosystems in nature are also crazy complicated, the shit that like they have going down as well. So I think it's a great sort of representation. People, we always say microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm, but like literally, I think the complexity of life speaks to the complexity of the macrocosm in ways that we can only sort of comprehend.
Right. I think in a lot of ways, what we're seeing now is the integration of all of these, principles that have kind of been ignored by the materialist paradigm of science, now being picked up by alternative researchers who are doing incredible stuff with it. I would encourage you, if you haven't yet, get the book, The Fourth Phase of Water by Gerald Pollack, because he's got a lot of stuff about the easy zones in water that then can change the outcome of certain experiments, especially within the body. Because if the heart was pumping enough blood to keep the body running, our heads would explode as soon as we bent over. So there's some other physical principle at work within the body that is causing water or blood to be pushed around, that a lot of people sort of glossed over since the 1800s. And so I think repicking up these water sciences and understanding how vital water is to the spiritual as well as the physical is so important, at least for moving forward in the field of medicine and science and all the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, I think it speaks to because something that people I think forget, especially in the occult community, you can take occult principles and apply them to this. Isaac Newton had an extremely prolific spiritual practice. Like this man, sure, he was an excellent scientist, but he was also an occultist. Like no question about that. And we even go back to alchemy, right? It never used to be chemistry and magic. It used to be sort of a singular science. And we see there's so many examples in history of people who have taken these sort of basic occult principles and thought, I wonder if I can actually put this to study, or I wonder if there's a way I can measure this. And then they've done it, and it's created some of our most important scientific principles. I think we have to be a little bit careful because people tend to take science and um, turn it into pseudoscience, which like I'm not here for. In fact, a lot of the Test Tubes and Cauldrons podcast is sort of debunking a lot of these claims because we can take those concepts and apply them to science, and we often like see real results to it, but they still need to be put under the scrutiny of the scientific method. And if they're
Rigor.
not significant, then we can't make any sort of definitive claim. But the other side of that is that just because it's not necessarily significant to the scientific community doesn't mean that it's not significant. I think that's the other thing, right? Is people say, oh, your magic has to be legitimized by science because science is like our truth in modern society, right? When
Right.
people say, I want to know what's true, the answer is science. Like, science will tell us. It's everybody's answer to that. But science is not capable of answering everything. Science is really primed to study the natural world. It's not necessarily primed to study the cause of the natural world. And so that's, I think, where people often get misled. And so we can study perhaps maybe an outcome of something or how it maybe affects the body. Like there's been a lot of actually great meditation studies recently that have been coming out the last couple of years looking at how meditation impacts the body itself, looking at like ECGs and reported outcomes, but also looking at, changes in like epigenetics and gene expression or certain chemicals that are produced in greater quantities and whatever. But some things I just don't think science are actually capable of measuring. And that's fine because
Right.
you don't need to have that scientific legitimacy to believe something is having an impact. And in some cases, belief is quite a powerful drug in and of itself. The placebo effect has actually like really has a high impact on people. There was a cancer study, I think it came out in 2017, where they had patients who they were giving chemotherapy to, the other patients who they, pretended like they were giving chemotherapy to. That was their placebo. And some of the chemotherapy patients in that control placebo group did just as well as patients who were given chemotherapy. There was another paper recently, and we did an episode on the podcast about prayer and the impact of prayer on people's health and their recovery. And the group that thought people were praying for them, but people weren't actually praying for them, they recovered almost as well as the group of people who did actually have people praying for them and knew they had people praying for them. Like, it's crazy how much the placebo effect can really impact people's perception of what's going on in the world.
Right. Big time. And we like to classify the placebo effect as, you've got the placebo, which is like where you're having a good effect, a good for the homeostasis. And then you've got the nocebo effect, which is where now your beliefs are negatively impacting your own life. And then at the very far end of the nocebo effect is voodoo death, where your beliefs have actually influenced your death because you believe you're going to die. So there's a huge slippery slope that I think a lot of people just aren't aware of, and changing those negative beliefs and practices are so important to having a happier life. It's ridiculous. I mean, that's really the factor right there. You can be as rich as you want to, but have a shitty internal life and never be happy.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I'm like, you want to know what the miracle drug is? It's the placebo effect. That's the miracle drug.
Ooh, oh, yeah, it's amazing what the mind can do to the body if it believes something.
Yeah,
Ooh.
crazy.
So, what are some other things like that you cover on your show? I know you do kind of get into like, I guess like science and magic, correct?
Yeah, so like we did a whole episode on like epigenetics recently because there's a lot of conversation in the occult community about, this passing on of trauma and like what that means. And people attribute a lot of things to genetics, to specifically like the sequence of the genome that like aren't actually attributed to genetics themselves. It's attributed to something called your epigenome or epigenetics. So and one of them is the inheritance of trauma, this idea of nature versus nurture. And again, sort of when we're talking about the intersection of like this philosophy of the world and these spiritual discussions, like nature versus nurture, and that debate has been going on for centuries. I mean,
Right.
we've got Plato talking about that shit and Aristotle. I mean, it has been going on forever. And we know that like scientifically, there is an impact on your environment regarding sort of how your body reacts to things. And so epigenetics is essentially how the genes of your body are controlled. So you might have a gene for something, but it may not ever be turned on because it's not useful for you in a particular region. A lot of traits that people have, like even just colors of skin, so like melanin production, or there was there was actually a really interesting study, 2021, I want to say, but they actually did a study following people from like pre-birth, so when they were still in their mother's uterus, and then after birth for 20 years, they followed them. And they were trying to look at some of the epigenetics behind extroversion and introversion and why somebody is maybe more extroverted, more introverted. And they actually found out it's because of the degree of methylation of a particular gene related to like this particular aspect of humans, which is so fascinating, right? Like methylation, to describe what that is, it's simply taking a methyl group, which is a carbon plus three hydrogens, and it's popped onto the promoter region of a gene. So when a gene is transcribed, you have a protein that binds to this promoter region and then transcribes it into mRNA that gets turned into proteins, and then it goes and does its thing in the body. But when you methylate that promoter region, that gene is unable to be transcribed. It essentially acts as like a barrier. So the protein can't bind to that particular area anymore. And so people who were extroverts had less methylation and thus more production of that gene than the people who were introverts. And that's something that you're able to study, which is so cool. And so, how many aspects of the individual are tied to that sort of same thing? And there's tons of different sort of post-translational modifications, which is what we call those, where so it could be methylation, it could be acetylation, it could be certain proteins and other things. But it clearly has an impact on the way people interact with the world. And that's just one example. And so I definitely think that because our genes are mostly the same across
Right.
people, right? The Human Genome Project, one of the best things they came out with was that we have 99.9% of our genomes are the same across the Homo sapien species. Now, that's not to say that like we are all totally identical, because that 0.1%, 0.01%, if your cells have 6 billion like DNA nucleotides in them, the 0.1% is still like 6 million. Okay, so it's still a pretty substantial difference from cell to cell, but generally speaking, we're very similar. And so then what determines the changes? The answer to that is your epigenome, is the epigenetics of it all. And so I think that is something that I really hope to see more research on in the future. This idea of nature versus nurture. Is it just nature? Is it just genetics? Or is it also nurture, in the sense that your genetics are influenced by your environment and the way that you grew up? And so, there was actually another research study that looked at Holocaust survivors. And it's interesting because some psychologists were noticing that the children of Holocaust survivors actually had like more mental issues and required more psychological help than the survivors themselves, which is so interesting. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. But they did some epigenetic studies and saw that the trauma that the parents induced during the Holocaust was actually passed along to their children, in the sense that they were more likely to have the same changes in terms of the epigenetics and methylations, all these other things, than the progeny or the children of people who hadn't incurred a lot of that trauma. So there is some scientific validation for this idea that like trauma specifically is passed from parent to child. Now, we have to be a little bit careful in saying that it's the same trauma. Really, it's more scientifically accurate to say the same changes or the same epigenome that we see in the parent is passed to the child. That is really all we can say scientifically. But if you want to sort of extend that thought, you can say, well, if this particular epigenetic change is causing this behavior in the parent, you may expect to see more of that behavior from somebody who has that same epigenome as a child. That's not something we can necessarily scientifically prove or like support, but we can see the association. And that can give us more insight onto how to study this further to give the idea more support, if you will.
Right. And the epigenetic studies really got started with a really kind of a mystical tint to it. So, what they were doing with the rat ancestral memory studies that really kicked off the epigenetics thing was trying to put rats through a maze and then testing their offspring, even though the offspring had had no contact with the sperm donor, on how well they did in the maze. And what they found is that there was a correlation between the rats who successfully got through that maze and the generations before them that did so as well. So there's a specific link along those ancestral memories somehow being
Well, I
transferred
think
from.
Darwin, with his theory of survival of the fittest, it's really epigenetics at work.
Bingo.
Like that is essentially what he was seeing. He was seeing that when conditions get, and this is actually something that we see also, if you look at the epigenetics of like famine, the people who live through the famine versus their children, you see effects in the children because of the way the environment of that whole famine itself impacted the parents. The same thing is with the survival of the fittest, right? We must adapt in order to survive, and that adaptation is can often be measured from an epigenetic perspective. And so there's a lot more research going on that. It's a booming field at the moment, which is great. It's been really fun to read a lot of the data. But yeah, so like that's one example of an episode that we did and why we did it. We've done plenty of episodes looking at like the science of prayer. So why do people pray? What is really the impact that it has? We looked at it from like an occult perspective. We also looked at it from a scientific perspective. We've looked at sort of the art of memory, for example. We've done some episodes on the impact of like meditation and stuff on the body and looking at like ECGs and papers that have come out about that. We've talked generally about, what it means to be a researcher and how that is applied and how you can apply that to a magical practice. Like, I think I maybe am going to get some flack for this. But I think in the occult community, people tend to be a little bit more relaxed in the way they sort of engage in these kind of things. But if you really want to have any sort of measurable like way of measuring change over a period of time, you really have to approach it and think about controls and replicability. And you need to be taking good notes. Like I have notebooks. I probably have 15 notebooks of my magical experience and I have recorded things so intensely because otherwise you can't make any definitive conclusions. You could just be fooling yourself. Your brain is really good at that. It's really good at fooling yourself, but to think of things that you didn't actually do or you didn't actually experience. And so having these really intense records it's a way of sort of keeping yourself accountable too and saying nothing has changed. And if nothing has changed, why is that? And how can I change what I'm doing to like make things better?
Well, I think we found the uniting link between Solomonic magic and academia. Rigor. You've got to be rigorous.
I think like magic and science will never explain the same things. And I think it's sort of a fool's mission to attempt that. Like a lot of the quantum science talk is a bunch of bullshit. And I just like am so not here for that. Because even like if you talk to physicists about this, and I have a number of friends who do crazy shit that I don't really understand. But if you talk to them about like the quantum experiment, this whole like observer effect, they essentially say it has no impact on like a macro level.
Right.
Things operate differently at a quantum scale than they do in the actual world. So trying to attribute quantum science to like a larger scale is absolute pseudoscience and it has no place. Like they would say it has no place in scientific discussion. Okay. And so I think what happens is again, like people are trying to take magic and they're trying to legitimize using science, using these quantum things that we don't understand. Even quantum scientists will say, I don't really know what the fuck is going on, but like this is what we see, right? This is what we're measuring. And they're doing a bunch of weird mathematical calculations to like figure out what it is they're seeing. But again, we can't attribute that to a macro level. And so magic, if you want to be rigorous about it in your approach to it, you can learn things about magic. And science, you can learn things about science. And when you combine the two and you say, like, you look at the world through a natural philosophy lens, which is really what we often use in magic, it can give you insights into things you could actually potentially change and study. And then the insights that you get from that can say, oh, I saw a difference here when these techniques were applied, like meditation, for example. And so what happens if I apply these other techniques? So, like, there can be sort of this communication between the two in the sense that they inform each other without this need to like be legitimized by each other. And I think that's what I would really like ask people to take moving forward. It's like treat your magic like science, but don't expect them to explain each other because they're just not primed to do that.
Right.
It'd be nice. um, what about if you don't mind, would you mind talking maybe a little bit more about the meditation stuff that you kind of talked about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of it was genetic and it was epigenetic, and also just looking at the impact of meditation on specific areas of the brain and like what it activates.
Yeah.
And I will say I'm not like a brain surgeon of any kind, right? So these are results that I read that I'm not necessarily like I didn't take this data myself or anything. But they were essentially able to show in terms of like reported patients, but also areas of the brain that are related to like patience and conflict management, and empathy. When you meditate and you engage in daily, it was like daily for 30 minutes or something, they have real impacts on those areas of the brain. Those areas of the brain sort of light up during the meditation. And also, there's specific chemical levels that are released during meditation as well that cause changes in your body too. I don't remember the whole list, but it was in this paper. Um, and over long periods of time, it has a very real impact on life. And there's plenty of studies to look at the longevity of someone's life who has also meditated. And a lot of these changes, the chemicals that are released and everything, like that is what sort of aids this longevity. And so it clearly has a correlation to people living a happy, this is related to the chemicals that are released, and a more fulfilled life. People feel more fulfilled when they engage in a lot of these meditative practices. And there's also some research, and I haven't done quite as much, like looked into this quite as much, around this idea of like sort of somatic breathing, or just more generally, the idea of like living a slower life and how that also impacts our the way that we perceive the world. There was a study done in 2017, I believe, where they were looking at how the perception of time has an impact on how your body like reacts to certain aging principles. So the faster that you perceive time moving by, which from a social media perspective, we perceive it moving very quickly,
Oh,
right?
yeah, right.
It has an impact on your body's connection then to aging. And so when people are saying things like, I feel really old when they're at younger ages, there seems to be, and there haven't been a lot of studies done on this, so I'm not going to say it definitively, but there seems to be a correlation between our perception of time and the actual aging process, which is crazy. And I hope that they do more research surrounding that, because I think it makes a lot of sense, because our brain does have a really strong influence over our bodies and how we respond to things. And so if it is based on like perception, which is something that our brain controls, then yes, it would send signals to your body to be trying to like sending these aging signals, I should say, earlier than they would normally be sent if we weren't perceiving that change.
Right. So the Greeks talked about subjective time in relationship to kairos and chronos. So
Yeah.
chronos would be the objective time, and then kairos would be the subjective time or the quality time that you are having in between. What's so painfully obvious about kairos is the ephemeral nature of the quality time. So he's only got a tuft of hair in the front of his head, and he's balancing a scale on a razor blade, and the only way to catch him is from the front. So the only way to get quality time is to make that plan and grab out in time to actually catch him. Whereas Kronos is sort of everywhere and omnipresent in everything, but that quality time is much harder to get a hold of.
Yeah, exactly. So again, like we see some of these concepts that people have noticed for years in various cultures. not just the Greeks that have this concept of time, um, actually like showing an impact on the biological world and the natural world. It's crazy to me, actually. The whole, even like how natural philosophy turned into science. Like if anybody's ever read Agrippa and you've read like the first book, I sort of dissed the first book when I initially read through Agrippa because I was like, this is some wild shit. But truthfully, I think that it goes to show that application of like natural philosophy principles leads to scientific revelation in many cases. I mean, Planet of the Elder said some wild shit, okay? Like, but there was some truth. There was one example I read recently, again, when I was going through it, where he talks about the dung beetle and its connection to the moon because the dung beetle, when it crawls under dung, it lays the eggs. And the eggs essentially sit and grow for 28 days. And then all these like young beetles come flying out of the dung. And so that's why they were associated with the moon, because this 28-day cycle. And you're like, that's a weird association to make. But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, they do. Dung beetles have a 28-day cycle. It's like a scientifically supported thing. And so they maybe attributed it to the moon spiritually, but like that connection between the moon and the dung beetle is there. I mean, that cycle connection exists. And so we see a lot of that in sort of these ancient science, but we also see it's cool to get the validation in like modern day of things that were said fucking forever ago. As
Absolutely.
crazy as he was, Planet of the Elder had some cool scientific claims.
Yeah, it's something I want to ask you. Do you think it's possible that, thousands and thousands of years ago they actually kind of understood science more than we think they did?
100%. I think a lot of people, because here's the thing.
Do
We
you think that's some of
attribute,
the secrets considered now? You know what I'm saying? The
yeah,
secrets and the mysteries, that type of shit.
because I think when we look back and we look at people like Plato, we look at people like Aristotle and all these folks who, Hypatia, all these people who had really impactful philosophy, I don't think we give them so much credence in being smart in these like ways of thinking, right? And logic and so on and so forth. And if they were smart in that way, why in God's name do you think they weren't smart in these other ways? Like I don't think it's a single application. Like the intelligence spans more than one topic. And actually it was oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name. Ibn Ezra, I think it was, who was a philosopher, but he also was one of the founding people in medical science, right? And it's like, why so many of the things that when it comes to treatments and stuff, a lot of it was determined by like magical philosophy, the four humors and all of that. Even Dr. Simon Foreman and Richard Napier, if you've never looked into them, they're fascinating folks in the 17th, 18th century, if I recall correctly. And they were astrophysicians. And so what they did essentially was they would have people come see them who were sick. And then they would take account of all the symptoms. So color of the urine, if someone was flushed with fever, so on and so forth. And they would also cast a chart of the decumbenture. So this is a chart when somebody took to bed when they were sick. And based on sort of where the planets were and the symptoms of the sickness, that's what they would use. Like they would use that to help them diagnose what was wrong with the individual. And because of this very elaborate system of the connection between the planets and various diseases and what the planets were attributed to, right? Saturn attributed to bones, Mars to inflammation, stuff like that, they were able to offer some remedies that actually like were effective, also based on planetary correspondence of
Yes.
herbs and various things, right? So like this idea that like science or that like medicine and magic or astrology are not compatible is blatantly false. We see this historically, and now were all of the concoctions created actually helpful? No. Okay, some of it clearly was not. Like if you make something out of a poisonous substance, it's not going to help somebody except for making them throw up, which I don't know. I guess purgation was often a way to help heal somebody. But my point being that they've always been connected and they sort of still are. And I don't think I think we sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater a little bit in the sense of saying, oh, because this one thing now in modern day is considered pseudoscience, talking about astrology, like we're gonna just not even consider that anymore when we like do medical treatments and stuff. So personally, like for surgeries and stuff, I have an astrologer that I consult to figure out good times based on like where Mars is and where is Mars at, because Mars is the ruler of like knives and sharp things and surgery and surgeons.
Mhm.
If I'm sick, for example, sometimes I'll cast a horary chart or I'll look at the astrology and be like, will medicine even help with this? And if the answer is no, I'll kind of just suffer through it. It's been interesting to see. Like I've done some comparative analysis where like I will be sick. I'll cast a chart, like a horary chart, to say will going to the doctor and getting medicine help. And the horary chart will say no, like it won't actually do anything for you. And then I'll go to the doctor anyway, and then they'll be like, oh, I think you just have like a viral infection. Like there's nothing we can really give
Right.
you, so just deal with it. And like that's happened so many times that I almost start to like believe the chart. I still do it because I'm just curious, right? And like if there is something really wrong, like I don't want to not go because right, like all those reasons. But I think it's an interesting correlation that like I've seen personally that my experience as a doctor correlates pretty positively to what I get from the horary chart, which is just so weird, but also incredibly fascinating. Um, so yeah, again, that like they can inform each other. There can be crosstalk. And I don't need the doctor to confirm that my horary chart is right. Like that doesn't even need to
Right.
be in the conversation. But I can certainly see that there seems to be some positive correlation there.
Well, you never know. He might be a Vedic astrologer, which is a possibility nowadays. So a lot of that comes to people like Edgar Casey, right? Edgar
Yeah.
Casey had that really strange foundation that he didn't seem to get from any of his books or anything like that, which was all based on this, astrology and all of these other medicines that he's getting. And it was like he was channeling Asclepius or this ancient healer. And we see how his prescriptions really actually do apply to these heavenly bodies and all the rest of this astrology that he wasn't exposed to. So there's
But
a,
it's yeah,
a really powerful correlation in there.
it's crazy. I actually this is something that yeah, if you were a doctor, you were a astrologist, yes. And this is something that in magic, I think people really sleep on. It's not a problem quite as much in high magic as it is in various forms of like witchcraft and I'm going to use the term low magic here, not in a denigrating way, just as a distinct like a way to distinguish.
Yes.
Um, but there's a lot of people who say you don't need to even bother about the astrology, but like the grimoire tradition especially, it is so blatantly apparent that the astrology actually matters quite
Right.
substantially, and that if you ignore it, shit's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. Like if you do a working when a planet is debilitated, why in God's name do you expect that planet to do anything helpful for you? It's a ridiculous notion. And it's one of those things where again, like apply these sort of standards of a more rigorous scientific um exploration of things as a way to be able to measure. Like I have done a couple of experiments where I've taken, and I have more of these on the way, where I've done like a pick a tricks talisman, for example. There was one
Nice.
I did one recently that is the Jupiter and Cancer talisman, and you make it to help you see spirits. And I made multiple of these talismans using various conditions. So the one variable that was consistent was Jupiter was in Cancer. But there were other variables, like I had the moon in the sign that recommended, I had the moon outside of the sign I recommended. I had various planets with positive, like Jupiter needs to be trine or in a positive aspect to Venus, for example. And
Okay.
so I had some talismans that did have that, and I had others that didn't. And I had some where Jupiter was opposing a malefic planet. Just essentially taking the recommended astrological weather around the creation of the talisman and doing some things and not doing other things, and seeing the effect that it would actually have on the efficacy of the talisman itself. And I've given these to people and they're testing them for me. And I'm asking essentially for reports back to see, okay, which talismans worked the best and which ones didn't. And I didn't tell them what the talisman was for. I just said, hey, when you're doing ritual, because all my friends are ceremonial magicians for the most part, I was like, when you're doing ritual and you're doing things with spirits, I was like, have this on you or wear it as a necklace, whatever you want. And let me know if it changes anything. So I don't have the results quite yet. But I asked them to give it like I think I what I say 6 months of testing. to get the results back. But like those are the kind of experiments you can do from like a scientifically rigorous perspective. Define your variables. Like don't tell your testers what it's for, because that is not a blind study, right? So mine is just a singular blind study in the sense that my testers are blind, but I am not. um get the results, record them, and then try it with like a bunch of different things. There's nothing stopping you from doing this kind of experimentation. And this is like
This
what I
really
think is the
interesting.
fun part about magic. Like really have fun with it, experiment, figure out what is needed, what is not needed, what has to be included in order for something to work, what maybe doesn't have to be included. And this can be informed by spirits too, right? Like this is something people I think don't like that I do this maybe, but I don't really give a shit. When a spirit tells me something, they're like, go do this thing. And I'm like, cool. Why do you want me to do this thing? And they either won't tell me or they'll give me a reason. I don't just take the spirit's word for it. Like I will test it. I'll say, okay, I'm gonna do it with this change that you suggested, and I'm gonna do it without the change that you suggested. And let's see how both of them work. More often than not, it works better with the way the spirit suggested. But like again, it's a way of trying to validate the technologies that are given to you through spirit trance or ritual or whatever. I think people oftentimes just take these things on faith, which is fine. But like there should like just because you got it in Gnosis or UPG or whatever, however you received it, doesn't mean that it's free from scrutiny. And certainly if you want to share this technique, it helps to be able to say, hey, I validated this. Here are people you can talk to that I validated it with to get their experience. You don't have to take my word for it as a person selling you whatever I'm trying to sell you. Go ask other people and let their testimony sort of be the enhancer behind whatever technology you're pushing forth. So I
We
think
just recently had a Solomonic magician talking about summoning the four winds before doing any Solomonic ceremony, because he
David
says,
Rankin, right?
right, David Regan, and he was
Yeah,
talking
I
about how
watched
much
that.
faster, right, how much faster and better it works just because he's playing around with it and he's using the techniques from these different things and applying logic and applying his own magical senses to it. So I think that's a very important part that I think a lot of people are missing out on. Is you can't just stick to the rote tradition. You actually have to find what works better for you.
Yeah. Well, and actually, so I recently worked his Clavis Intelligence Yarum. I did the whole work, the whole ritual with a magic group that I do a lot of work with. And I did the ritual without the winds. Like, cause I emailed David and I was like, hey, I know you talked about like this whole wind conjuration and adding it in. And I was like, I would like to test that, but this is the first one I'm doing, so I'm not going to incorporate it this time. But his Clavis Spiritum book is stuck in customs right now, which is driving me crazy because I want to get my hands on it. Um, but essentially, all this to say that we've done the one ritual without the winds. Like the next ritual that I do with his system, I want to incorporate the winds to do that exact same experiment, right? Like I want to see for myself. People have said it, but I want to see. And so yeah, doing that experimentation I think is so fun and important. Huge fan of David Rankin. Yeah, you guys had him on, and I was like, oh yeah, watching that
Oh, no,
episode.
I'm a huge fan of him. Like I said, I was reading his stuff since I got into this stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so it was really wild for me to actually have him on. I was like, wow. Is there anything else you would like to talk about before we wrap it up, or anything that you think's worth mentioning?
I mean, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of great topics today.
Yeah,
This
we
was
did
really
actually.
fun.
We talked a lot in an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, it was
Headless,
cool.
you got anything?
No, I'm good. This has been a great interview.
Yeah. There's definitely things I'd like to definitely have you on again in the future. I'm sure there's
Oh
there's
yeah, and you know,
things
people
I like.
can feel free to hit me up on socials too. I love talking about. I tell
Yeah,
people all the time. You mentioned like Agrippa to me. You mentioned occultism, or you mentioned any kind of science topic, and I'm here, and I will talk to you for hours. Like this is not. This is my life. I love it all so much. And Headless, like we should talk about your experiments. I'd love to hear how all that's going for sure.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Alchemy Mondays. I'm going to get the Soxolite out again this Monday, and we're going to do some more experimentation. It's going to be great. So,
Sounds
yeah.
great.
Oh, you know what I was meaning? I was meant to say before. I don't know if it was Jabir Ibn Hayyan that you were trying to think of before. I think he's considered the father of chemistry, and
Maybe.
he was an alchemist. To
Yeah.
where I think even some like kind of like the protocols they have now are almost like kind of like a duplicate or some of his stuff almost kind of got moved over, like the way he would do certain things and write it down, kind of
Yep.
become staples, and like it was reused now.
Alchemy is so fascinating because you have, not to go on a whole different rant topic. If you guys have time, we can get into this.
All right.
But alchemy is such a fascinating field because you sort of have two different like time periods of alchemy. You have alchemy when it was sort of initially born as like a discipline, and then you have its resurgence sort of in the Renaissance period, and then you have sort of a secondary resurgence where alchemy became entirely psychological. I hate that period. I prefer to go to the early period where alchemy was really attributed more to these sort of scientific experiments. I mean, these people were trying to understand matter, and this is sometimes where a lot of plants actually get their correspondences from, where they would do an extraction and say, oh, the mercury of this plant is a specific color, it's gold, therefore it's associated with the sun. Like, these are the sort of ways that people were applying this natural philosophy to this more scientific exploration of various plants, because we talk about like the hidden virtues, the occult virtues, as Agrippa calls them. They're virtues that aren't necessarily apparent all the time in like the physical manifestation of things. They are sometimes, which is why like the sunflower is associated with the sun, because it resembles the glyph of the sun, and it's also yellow, and it also, like, when the sun is up, the flower will actually look towards the sun, right?
Yeah.
And so you have all of those characteristics in it as well. But then when alchemists were doing a lot of these sort of extractions of things, we're now looking at the hidden essence, the hidden inside of the plant, if you will. And that also has an impact on the correspondences you can assign to things. And it's interesting too, because, for example, Agrippa also talks about in book 1, he'll say the onion is both lunar and it's martial, because by itself it's white and it's full of water, right? Those are all lunar things. But if you cut it, it causes pain. That's a very martial characteristic. And if you were to do an alchemical extraction of onion, which if you've never done it before, you should. It's actually kind of fun. It smells awful though. Do it outside. Um, like the chemicals that are in the mercury of the onion are painful. Like, if you actually breathe in, that's gonna burn your nose.
Oh, hold on, Esther. Your voice is starting to screw up for a second. Hold on. Try talking
Sorry,
again. You
is
might
that
have.
better?
Yeah. Sometimes it'll like glitch out. You have to like let it catch up. Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
go on from I think cutting the onion. No, wait, no, you were saying
Yeah,
so.
cutting the onion.
Yeah.
So when you cut an onion, it
Oh, it's still
is
doing it.
harmful to you. Like, is it still going?
No, I think you're good now. Sorry.
Okay.
I think
When you cut into an onion, it causes harm to you, right? The enzymes cause harm. And so that's why it has a martial quality to it. And when you actually do an extraction of an onion, and you extract the mercury and the sulfur, if you were to run that through an LCMS, which I've done before, and that's the reason why I'm talking about this, which is liquid chromatography, gas chromatography, and then mass spec is essentially a way of breaking down the molecule and looking at its individual atoms, you'll see that the components within the sulfur and the mercury, now that they're concentrated, they're painful. If you like breathe it in, it burns the inside of your nose and your mucous membranes. And so we even see that martial quality, which is like a hidden quality, technically speaking, until you bruise the onion of some kind, that's like a hidden occult virtue that you can elucidate using alchemy. And now we have ways of testing alchemical things on a more scientific level, which is great. But just the fact that if you had then had that mercury and you smelled it and you got the pain, that would also have indicated to you that the onion has this martial nature to it as well. So alchemy has always been really scientific, right? It's been a way to explore the natural world and all of the hidden virtues that lie within the various parts of the world, whether it be minerals or plants or whatever. And that's really what I love about alchemy. That's what I think is so interesting. Is that it's like another way of exploring the natural world using some of these more ancient philosophies that are still applicable in modern day. Okay, now I'm done.
Well, I just wanted to throw in there that for me, I don't see a real separation between the psychological and the more natural forms of alchemy, because the original sort of Greek mentality was that everything is existing inside of the mind of Zeus, the nous of Zeus, right? And so what they were doing is they were finding the hidden properties because it found the hidden properties in themselves as well. You've got the tie between astrology and personality types and all the rest of these things that go directly into alchemy. And I think, when people sort of see that linkage between the mind and everything and this vast web of associations that are created from it, it's really hard not to, apply alchemical principles to psychology in some ways.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. There's also an aspect of, right, that a lot of our associations are based on perception. And again, perception is something that the brain handles.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think if especially with the Islamic ones, I mean, those seem to be the oldest ones I've come across. Some of those alchemists, you look at the stuff that they're actually doing, with like plants and stuff, it's fucking
Yeah.
wild.
It's cool.
Yeah. Really, there like how they even had charts of like add this to do that to make like they really knew like how to move things around. Actually,
Yep.
it's like god damn, like I don't even know how to like. I have a problem making chocolate milk. You know, what I'm saying? These guys are just making all sorts of crazy shit.
Oh, that's a great book. Yeah, great book.
But thank you very much, Esther, for coming on. That was a lot of fun actually for me. Thank you.
Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for talking about science and spirituality, two of the best topics.
Yes. Oh, definitely. And we'll definitely get you on again in the future. Hellish Giant, why don't you remind everybody all your shows where they can find you?
All right. You can find me on Mondays on YouTube doing Alchemy Mondays. You can find me on Tuesdays doing 777 with Nick, also on YouTube. And on Thursdays, we've got the magical mailbag. So send in your occult/esoteric/paranormal stories to headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com. Fridays, usually doing something with Nick or Jules, doing some kind of a crazy thing. Definitely check it out. And then on Sundays, I've got the trilogues with Ethan and Ricardo. So check all those shows out. Put the bell on. Have fun.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Headless. And Astra, please let everybody know where they can find all your stuff again.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram as Astrologicial, so Cial. And then you can find most of my work. I'm trying to make a greater effort to publish some magical experiments and stuff on Substack, which is titled Celestial Crucible. So actually our ritual group's most recent work through of the Cloudless Intelligentiarum ritual is up on Substack if you want to take a look. So there's some great stuff there with magic squares and everything too. But that's it.
Awesome. Thank you very much again. And like I said, after the show, if you don't mind, just send me those links. I'll make sure I add them to the show.
For sure. Sounds good. And
thank you, everybody who was in the chat. Looked like everybody was thoroughly enjoying this as much as I was. And that's why we go live. And and until the next one, everybody be well. Later.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.